All right, can you give me 5 minutes before and do it again? She's gonna go get stuff for the baby and come back. Good morning, and welcome to Amplify Christian Church's Community Workshop. Today's workshop, which is workshop number 2, is on understanding special education and breaking down the barriers. We thought it was really important to do this workshop because of all the things happening today in our politics, and we know that one of the things that will be impacted the most is special education. But outside of that, our Black and Brown communities normally struggle the most with understanding special education, and they're the ones who are normally placed most in special education classes. So before we begin, I wanted to thank the Reverend Orlando Scott, the pastor of Amplify Christian Church, who has been who has been so generous and has always done what he knows is best for the community. And so I'm so grateful to be here today, to be part of his legacy and to be part of the community and doing things that will have our community be better in the long run. So to begin, a little bit about me. My name is Reverend Denisha Dixon. I am a pastor, author, teacher, clergy. I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I'm a special education teacher. I also am often in general education classes. I write IEPs. I test children who are going to be placed in special education classes, and I am part of the overall bigger process. So I'm here to explain from an educator's perspective, but also from a parent's perspective, what it means to have your child be considered for special education, what those terms mean. There's a ton of terms we talk about when we talk about special education, and so I want to go ahead and make that a little easier. I'm also the author of Navigating IEP Meetings for Parents, and my new book is coming out, which is Navigating IEP Meetings for Teachers and Administrators. So look forward for that. All my books that are displayed are also available on Amazon. So let's get started. So one of the things I want us to realize is, why are we here today? So whether you are a student, a parent, someone thinking about becoming a parent, or a teacher, it's important for us to recognize that special education is complex. So a lot of times when we hear terms, we hear IEPs, 504s, LRE, FAPE, and those terms can be overwhelming. And I know for our communities, especially as an immigrant, sometimes those things feel as if they're an attack on us as parents or on our children. And those can be true, but oftentimes is not. If a student is struggling in the classroom and the school system has tried numerous resources to help, oftentimes they will ask for your permission to test that child to see exactly how they're performing and what areas they might be able to help. So that can get complicated as well, because your students would have to be struggling for a long time before they get help. And if they are C students, you might feel as if, why isn't anyone helping my child? But C is still a passing grade. And so if your student is a C student and you find that it is taking 2 hours of homework every night, but they're barely passing, they're still passing, and the school doesn't consider that failing, right? And so I have a lot of parents say, well, there's no way I can keep this up. And I will say to them, I know it's hard, but you might need to let your child fail. Because if they fail, then the school system can begin to help them from failure. That is often very hard. I know as a parent, I don't want my child to fail. And I know as a teacher, it is hard for me to watch children fail. So sometimes we give, as teachers, more than they need to be successful because we're trying to get them over the hump. And as parents, we are giving our all, sometimes more than we have, to make sure they're successful. And that's hard. But in order for this school to help, children need to be failing. Okay, so again, one of the issues we have is special education doesn't mean stupid. And I think oftentimes in our communities, especially immigrant communities, we hear our child is being tested to be put in special education, and we think that means our children are stupid. And it does not mean that. It means that they are struggling to perform in the ways that they need to perform to be successful. And so oftentimes that can mean After they get tested, they get maybe co-taught classrooms, which would be they have a special education class and a special education teacher and a general education teacher in the classroom, but they're still in the same classroom. They're just getting what they need to be successful. The other thing that parents often ask is, well, how long does it take for them to figure out what my child needs? It depends on the school system, it depends on your child, it depends on the resources available. A full academic test, it includes a psychological evaluation, several academic assessments that could take days. It also requires sometimes a speech evaluation, and oftentimes a child can be in the process for 6 months to a year and a half before their evaluation is complete. And so I know, again, watching your child fail for 6 months to a year can seem overwhelming, and it can feel as if no one is helping, and we are not doing what the school needs to do to help your child. But no matter what the system is, if you feel as if you're not getting what you need, you should always voice your opinion. I know right now, several of the school systems don't have enough psychologists, which means that the psychologists they have a wait list for the students they're testing. And that means that that's going to take longer and longer for kids to be evaluated. Now, after waiting for your kid to be evaluated, there's an initial meeting, and that meeting is where a team of people sit around and decide, based on the assessments, based on grades, based on what they know of your child, whether or not they qualify for special education. And there are plenty of children who are just average students, which is why they're failing, and they don't qualify. So after waiting 6 months to a year and a half, you could still end up with a child who does not qualify for special education services. And I know that's even harder, but there are other resources for those children. A 504 is for students who have some kind of medical issue and does not qualify for an IEP, but may be able to get additional services through a different means. And so it is important for you to ask questions. Well, if my kid is struggling and they don't qualify, what else are you going to do to help them? How can I help my child be more successful? Sometimes when we sit in meetings with the assistant principal, 3 or 4 teachers, a special education teacher, the psychologist, the speech language pathologist, we don't want to ask questions because we don't want to seem stupid. Because they have thrown around a lot of jargon. They've thrown around IQs and processing and a million things. I've sat through so many of those meetings that sometimes I become ignorant to the fact that they're using words that other people might not recognize. And so when you're sitting in those meetings and you are confused, stop them and tell them, I don't understand. Because that is the only way you are going to be able to advocate for your child, right? If you don't understand, then when you leave that meeting, nothing will get done because you might not, and if you leave a meeting, and I always say, so an IEP meeting is a team process. And if you leave the meeting and you feel as if you have additional questions, call and ask someone what your questions are. If you leave the meeting and you have signed off that you agree, that's fine. Nothing is set in stone, right? All our decisions are not set in stone. So as a parent, if you leave a meeting and you're confused and you felt as if you didn't understand, call and speak to a case manager, call and speak to an assistant principal, because we are here to support you and your children. So one of the things I definitely want to speak about is, what is special education, right? So special education provides tailored instructions to meet the unique needs of students with disabilities. And we talked about that process requires testing, that often requires that the students are showing behaviors academically or behaviorally that the school feels does not support their academic success. And so they would then reach out to parents and ask, do we have your permission to test your students? I find a lot of parents say no if they're not sure what that means, or if they think that means their students are stupid, but testing can never hurt, Because if they test your students, you can then revoke whatever decision they've made if you decided that you don't agree. However, if they test your students and have that test is still part of your student's academic record, and you can change your mind later, or if they're old enough, use it for services for college or something else. So knowing who your student is academically, psychologically, that full-fledged assessment we have is going to be helpful even if you revoke services. And that word revoke is a good one to know, because you always have the right to say no. As a parent, you can say no matter what stage you're in, because it is your right to decide what the school does with your child, including the major assessments that they do all the time. Okay. So sometimes I work at a charter school, and sometimes people assume that public schools and charter schools have the same rules and regulations. And so charter schools do not have the same rules and regulations as your public K through 12. And because charter schools are in their own way independent, they sometimes have their own rules. So each charter school has their own rules. They're under a public school, and so they usually get funding in some way from Gwinnett, DeKalb, Fulton. And they have some requirements under those systems that they're under, but they also have their own unique rules, regulations, and laws that it is your responsibility to know and to ask about, so that you can know what you need to do. Charter schools often are separate from your public schools. So if you live in a certain area, your children can go to the public school that they're zoned for. What I would love to say, which most people don't realize, is that public school is still responsible for your child on some degree. So if a charter school does not want to test your child, you can take them out of the charter school and have them tested by the public school that they're under. Okay? So a lot of charter schools don't have the resources or the means to do a lot of things that the public school has more resources. It's hard to say that the public schools have more resources, because we know as we are moving forward in the political scheme that we're losing a lot of those resources as well. So one of the reasons Pastor Orlando and I wanted to have these workshops was so that if people needed to start the process, now is a good time to start it while it still exists and while the resources are still there, because we don't know how long that's going to be present. All right, I've been talking for what feels like forever. Knowledge is power. Are there any questions? Yes.
Okay, I have a granddaughter, and she's listed as ADHD, and she has so many problems with school. She was an A student in second grade, and now she's in the third grade. She's failing tremendously, and we don't know what to do. I don't know if she's not paying attention, but when she's at home and she does her homework and everything is fine. She always complains about other children are picking on her and different things like that, and no one, the teachers aren't doing anything about it, or is she making it up? I don't know. But I do know that at one time she was excellent, doing all her work in school and at home. And now we don't know what's going on.
Okay. All right. If you cannot hear the question was, I have a granddaughter who has been diagnosed with ADHD, was very successful in school in the second grade, and is struggling in the third grade for a variety of reasons. And the parents and grandparents are wondering what should they do. So that's actually a super complicated question, especially grade level wise. Moving from second grade to third grade, things get much harder reading, writing, and math-wise. They're still learning to read, but moving more from learning to read to reading to learn, and that normally has some issues with the students. There are also higher academic expectations of third graders. That's when we start expecting them to have more focus. They have more expectations. The work gets more difficult, gets more intense because we're preparing them for 4th and 5th grade and middle school, right? We start that process oftentimes in the 3rd grade. Also, I'm not sure if that diagnosis is part of the school. Like if the school has, if that diagnosis is part of an IEP program, if your grandchild has a 504. So I would say we need to start with knowing what services she qualifies for and what services she has. If she has any of those things, then having a meeting with the school to let them know that we need to change or better support her, because right now she's failing. If she is on an IEP, individual education plan, then the school should have already been doing that, because that should be part of the process. If she isn't, we might need to ask if there can be some assessment and testing done. In the meantime, if she doesn't have one, can we implement a 504 plan, because her diagnosis would qualify her for a 504, which is for students who are not yet qualified for an IEP. And then we can figure out, does she need more services? Does she need reduced? They can do things like sit different people next to her. They can have sometimes with ADHD, they need some accommodations. There might be some things that needs to happen because she's getting overwhelmed by everything in the classroom. And the 3rd grade classroom can get hectic. So there's a lot of things we can do, but we just need to know what exactly is already in place. And if nothing, start the process of putting something in place so she can feel supported, so that then she can start performing at her academic best.
You said that as a supportive parent, we try our best to continue to help our children be successful and pass. But sometimes, if I'm hearing correctly, we're going to have to let them fall so we can put them in an environment that would be the best for their education. Am I hearing that correctly?
Correct. One of the most impactful image I've ever had is that of the butterfly, right? While the butterfly is in the cocoon, it needs to get out. And the best way it does is it uses its wings to push itself out. If we were to cut it out, the butterfly would die because it doesn't have the muscles and the wings it needs to fly. So oftentimes what we have done is we've handicapped our children so they don't have what they need to truly survive. They don't know how to do the work because we've been doing it for them. I have plenty of parents who their kids get A's online, but D's in the classroom. And so, yes, so sometimes we need to put them in a place where they can start figuring out how to perform and be successful. Okay, but there's some levels to that. And so I would suggest asking the teachers and the staff at the school, or if you want to go to wednesdayscoach.org and ask for a free consultation to figure out what is the fine line between that. Because also, if you're failing and you have no idea what to do and you have no resources, that's not helpful.
What would be the first step if I recognize something's going on with my child and they're not getting it? What's the first step that I should do?
Have call a conference with the school. Have everyone sit at the table and figure out what are they seeing at the school, what are you seeing, what are some suggestions they have. And I would include my student. Sometimes when the children are young, they try not to include them in the conversations. I have learned that if we are truly building problem solvers in children that we want to have the muscles to be successful, including them in the conversations, because they may have insight we're unaware of. They may be being bullied and being quiet. they may not be able to see. I've had a student who just couldn't see the board, and parents and teachers didn't realize they couldn't see, right? So I would say call and have a meeting and include your students all the way up to first grade to say, I see you struggling. Can you tell us what's happening? Get the teacher's input, and then have the school recognize that you are there and a support system. Because oftentimes, if we don't see parents or we call and they don't answer, it's harder for teachers to move forward because we're missing a piece of the picture.
Just a quick question. If I am a new parent that found out that my child is eligible for special education services, and I see that you have a book here that says navigating a guide for parents navigating IEP meetings, what would you recommend would be like my first steps, or what should I anticipate as a parent, or what should I do?
So my book is always a first step, but having a conversation, again, if you go to wednesdayscoach.org, a consultant will be able to assist you figuring out what the first steps are. But knowing your rights as a parent for me would be number one. And that is available on the website. Like, you go to the boards of education, they have the rights posted. If your child just qualified, they should have given you a copy of your parents' rights. Read it, highlight it, go back over it again and read it. That would be my first step, and asking for help along the way.
Thank you.
Hi, so I have a little brother who is in the 8th grade, and he's about to start transitioning into high school. And he's doing pretty okay, but when he comes home from school, he calls me and we kind of go over his homework together. And a lot of the time it takes hours, and he's really confused, and he's listening in school. And he really is trying his best, but we don't really know how to help him outside of me just helping him with his work. And his dad is pretty, old. He's not really aware of how to go about, getting help from the school. His dad is about 60, my brother's about 14, and there's not really anybody to help either one of them. So I'm kind of, I want to know how can I, help them or something.
How old are you?
18.
Okay. So you're an adult, right? So the reason I've asked what your age is sometimes I can say you can continue to help him and suggest to dad to send an email or to get more resources. So you can actually email the school and let them know that you're his sister, that you're 18, and that you've been helping him and you notice he's struggling. And if there are, what do they suggest? Because that starts the process. So I will say my number one thing as an advocate is always put everything in writing, because it's a receipt for later, right? So if he's struggling and you have asked for help and you have reached out, and I would even see if dad can reach out, make some phone calls, then we start to see that we've been asking for help, he's struggling, and nothing is happening. We're hoping that the school systems are wonderful and they're always going to do what is needed and what is necessary, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So it is possible that your brother has a couple different things that's happening. And as you said, he's an 8th grader moving into high school. Yeah. So that makes me sad to hear, because normally we try to catch kids way before they get to 8th grade or even high school, because it gets more, the academic expectations becomes more difficult. So you might need to reach out to an advocate, but you can start the process by sending an email to his teacher's counselor. I would probably start with a counselor or assistant principal and say, hey, we've noticed this is happening. Give some examples. If, however, he is a C, like a B or C student, they may not be able to help because he is not struggling academically. And that might be because you're spending all that time helping him. So again, we might go back to that first conversation we had of, you may need to have his grades reflect his ability and not yours and his, okay? And I know that's hard. All right. For those of you here, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Reverend Orlando Scott, for having us here at this amazing community workshop. Of course, our next workshop is scheduled for April 19th, same time, same place. And we're switching gears a little bit because we're going to be talking about our community as caregivers, spotting persons in crisis. And then we have our last but not final, May 3rd. And it is, again, another one on our community as caregivers, supporting mental health and wellness. Because just as we often think that special ed means we're stupid, we oftentimes in our communities are afraid to ask for help or afraid to seek a therapist or a counselor because we think that means that we are not strong. And it means that something is wrong with us when indeed it just means that we're human. So again, thank you so much, all of you who came out, and thank you all those who are watching.